that's pretty much a dead budget right now, and about 200,000 with the house budget. So we're still not going to cover that $500,000 even if we got what, you know, the best case scenario with teachers.
I'm reading the house budget wrong, that's for 60,000.
No, because it was,
I thought the house was 330,000 that we were below, and it was, you just said
oh, right,
273.
60,000.
Does the, can I ask if the finance committee's taking a position on the, taking money from the stabilization?
I don't know if they have. We just mentioned
No,
it
we
Friday.
have not, well, we're meeting tomorrow, we're going to talk about
Talk
that.
about
Speaking for myself, I'm opposed to using the stabilization fund until everything else has been exhausted, because the stabilization fund is it's a one-time. You're not going to carry on an ongoing program out of the stabilization fund. You say there's $1.7 million, which is true, but if you hit it for $500,000, you've hit nearly a third of it, and our borrowing costs are going to go through the roof, which is going to just make the rest of the budget that much more expensive. So, I understand what you're saying, but I think that's got to be the last thing we do. I mean, that's the savings of the town. I think it's got to be spent very judiciously, and we're below where we should be. That should be up over $2 million. We've not been able to add anything to it in a number of years. So, and it would have to be something extraordinary to take money out, and taking money out of it for operating funds is not a wise thing to do.
I understand that our bond rating is set based on, one component is the balance of cash in our stabilization account. But it would be helpful to know at what point our interest rate would change. For instance, if we drew it down from 1.7 to 1.5, would that affect a change? And if so, what would the change be? Because we hear a lot of a truth, but you say that if we draw that account down, then our bonding rate will go through the roof and our debt payment will increase next year. But to what extent? Is it an extra $20,000 a year payment for us to buy down $500,000? It would be helpful in making that decision.
Two things. One depends on how much borrowing. The other is that the folks that are looking at this are looking at what the plans are. Okay, if it was a one-time shot to use it for a capital project that's not going to be repeated, there's one view of it, that it was used to solve a one-time problem. If it is used to pay for operating costs, then that makes them a little more concerned that there isn't enough coming into the town, and there isn't, to sustain the operating costs of the town. And that gives them a different view of the financial strength of the town. So it may be $200,000, but if it's $200,000 with the look that next year it needs to be another $200,000 or $300,000, and maybe the next year out it needs to be, it's going in the wrong direction. And that's what's going to affect our bond rating. I don't know the specific answer to your question of what our borrowing percentage would change by. Perhaps Joe could work that out for us. I don't know the answer to that, but it certainly would have an impact. And if we hit it to, as I said, for $500,000 of $1.7 million, without even knowing what those answers are, my guess it would be fairly substantial.
Maureen, I don't have the sheet of paper with me, but I do have in my possession a list of what borrowing would cost at different bond ratings that we had asked for. And keep in mind that we've got a $2 million bond issue that's going to go up sometime between now and Labor Day, I would guess, in that time frame, associated with the turf field. I think that's a school project.
I think that's a Hillview project.
Yes, but it may make it unaffordable for the Hillview in terms of the commitment they made. Their numbers were based on an estimated 4% interest rate. Keep that in mind, too. Use the ARRA money first.
I don't know.
Well, I do want, before, I just want to correct my deficit numbers. If we were to get the best-case scenario with the teachers, it would be 477,000 with the Senate Ways and Means, 55,000 with the House Ways and Means, and 189,000 with the governor's budget. I think the governor's budget is dead on arrival, and the House Ways and Means was a little bit overly optimistic.
I think what you're going to see is a compromise that brings the Ways and Means in the Senate.
Yeah.
Also.
And
They're
now what do
gonna-
you mean by your best case scenario? You're talking
Well,
about
if the
this-
teachers, if the teachers agreed to no step raises and no cost of
That's
living.
it. So
Just-
no cost of living and no step raises,
Right.
is your calculation.
Just for
Yeah.
clarification too, I just want to draw a distinction here. 50%, almost exactly 50% of our teachers under the current contract are entitled to a step raise next year. Whereas on the town side, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, I'm going to guess that between 10 and 20% of the employees are entitled to a step raise because of the nature of the steps and the nature of the turnover and both sides.
And
of
there's
it.
a lot fewer steps.
Right, and there's a lot fewer steps, so it is 50% of the teachers that are affected by this.
One thing, I don't know if at some point we want to take a consensus on the school committee in terms of taking money, requesting money from stabilization.
Do you think we should do that now, or should we wait to hear about whatever monies might be available in the room? Is there maybe some room in hotel tax money for
Actually, we could do that on, what town meeting, actually. Yeah, we probably should wait.
But I do
Yeah,
want to.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We have to vote on a budget number now.
We do not, well, we did.
We
We
did.
just voted, Jerry.
Then 23,
That's
25, 860.
Jane?
I just want to clarify something. You said earlier that the town is getting $853,000 to bring North Reading up to foundation for FY10.
Right.
And you're making a decision to use half of that in 10 and half in 11. Do you know for a fact that you're able to carry it over to 11?
Actually, we're recommended to cut it in half of that.
It was recommended to you to do that?
Well, when you said as a, do you know for a fact?
Thanks for
We've been
putting
told orally, this is my job to be very compulsive about some of these things, but we've been told orally that we should reserve 50% of those funds for FY11, but we haven't seen the application yet. So we are listening, the Commissioner of Education is telling us to do that, but we're just waiting to see it writing.
So that's why we've taken the 400,000, that they have the 8, and then they've asked us to split it between recovery and reinvestment. So that's why you see the 200 going in the budget, and the other 200 will put towards some kind of capital. There is no capital article for town meeting. We'll deal with it come October, when we have a better handle, and we review that list. Don?
The 650,000 that's been brought to fiscal '09 to make up for the Chapter 70 money, is that coming from the ARRA? Is it coming from the 853,000?
No, but it's
No.
coming from the pool that 853 was drawn from.
Right.
Oh,
We do
so it's
see
the
that-
part that we don't know about?
Right.
Our guess is that's
Okay.
coming from the pool that should be going in 2011.
Right.
Okay, okay.
Can we just get back to the stimulus funds for a second? So the 850-some thousand that we have to split, does it specify how you're supposed to split it in terms of the years? Like, can you do all investment or all recovery in
No.
2010 and all investment in 2011?
No, that's not the way the memos.
Okay, I'm
The
just
way the
curious
memos
about
read,
that.
you're supposed to split it 50/50.
50/50 over 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have to apply to a grant process, so even your intentions then are scrutinized. And the purpose for which you spend those funds could be questioned, so there's a lot of paperwork, strings. Deanna?
Earlier, I know you do a lot of work with your superintendents. We cannot be the only community that is dealing with this issue and this question. I guess the question I have is, what are other superintendents doing to handle this issue in their communities? And then what would be the downside or the worst-case scenario and you being and using 75% rather than 50%, or a number that gets us closer to where we need to be? What is the downside? What are the ramifications so that the, community can make an informed
I
decision?
think the ramification there is you may not get it because it's a grant, so you have to basically tell them that you need to receive the contract.
Right to the dollar.
So you may not even get it if you do that.
The first part, the IDEA, that grant application, as I said, is out now. We have the whole guidelines on it. It's very exact, the 50/50, the way I outlined it here. So that's why we're targeting 160 and 160, and it's a limited amount over 2 years. The 853 came out originally, when you look at anything that came out from the state, came out targeted only for FY10, only for about 160 communities, to bring those communities in FY10 up to foundation level. So it was a dollar amount. It was targeted toward a specific number of communities. Then for those communities that did not receive, because they were getting nothing out of that second pod, the rules were changed so that all of those other communities would receive the equivalent of $50 per student. Now that was all in place so that every town, city and town would get something, albeit North Reading was getting a much larger percentage in FY10. The language for FY11 was always very uncertain, but it was some element of hope. You can apply, we can't tell you now how much money, but we believe that we'll be able to repeat and keep you at foundation level in FY11. And those rules were fairly consistent in my mind until 2 weeks ago when the state announced FY09 Chapter 70 funding was going to be slashed in the final quarter, fourth quarter, and that you could apply in a 1 week's time, although they didn't have the application ready, but it now came out a week ago. Carl and Joe Tassoni worked on it, and they gave you the set of rules of how you can spend that money, but it's taking from a large pot of stimulus money, and everything that's been coming out now is saying all bets are off for FY11. Now, my recommendation to the committee to split it into 2 pots, FY10 and FY11 at the $425,000, and then to further subdivide it, and that was following the 50/50 rule for the IDEA. Remember, I haven't seen, there's no application out yet. We have a lot of rhetoric. I'm hearing that there may be some loosening of that 50/50 split. Will it be 80/20, 90/10, or 55/45? I don't know. I do know that I have to sign assurances. I've seen those assurances, and I'm going to have to really think long and hard before I put my name to something where a year from now, I'm not called to question for decisions made tonight or at this town meeting that could jeopardize funding for North Reading. This is a federal grant. We've been down the road as a community with federal grants before and know what happens when you have to pay it back. This is a lot of money. And then furthermore, quarterly payment, quarterly reviews on my documentation of how this money is being used to improve education. Now, in terms of how other superintendents are handling it, it's pretty much how I've outlined it here. And in terms of the collaboration efforts, back in November, I initiated a series of meetings with my colleagues from Andover, Wilmington, Reading, and Lynnfield to think about how can we better collaborate. And that's on top of everything else of trying to manage everything in-house. And I've also had conversations, albeit at a minimum, with our town's library. And I know, Marcy, you've been part of those conversations to see which ways can we share resources even between our school and town libraries as one example. I think we're doing a lot of good